Welcome back, focused learners. Today, we are unpacking a seriously fascinating lecture delivered by Professor Dilip P. Barad at SRM University, Sikkim. We're going to be exploring the incredible intersection of artificial intelligence and literary theory. Basically, we're looking at how the historical texts that shape our world are currently shaping the minds, so to speak, of the machines we use every single day.
So let me ask you this right out of the gate. Is artificial intelligence truly neutral? We kind of just operate under this assumption that machines, because they run on math and code, are inherently objective. We like to think they give us pure, unadulterated facts. But in today's explainer, we're going to challenge that core assumption head-on and investigate what really happens when a machine learns from, well, deeply flawed humans.
Here's our roadmap for the explainer today. We'll start with the illusion of neutral AI, look through the literary lens, test for gender and racial biases, unpack the politics of algorithms, and finally, look at how we can actually fix this by becoming data uploaders. Okay, let's dive into this.
Section 1. The illusion of neutral AI.
Look, the fundamental truth we have to grasp here is that the virtual world isn't some pristine, separate utopia. It is a direct mirror reflection of our very real and very flawed physical world. If there are problems in reality, they're inevitably going to show up in our technology. And that brings us to where those flaws usually begin, unconscious bias. This is all about instinctively categorizing people and things without even realizing we're doing it. Professor Barad points out that this is often driven by mental preconditioning rather than our actual lived experience. We hear things in our childhood, they condition our minds, and eventually our internal belief systems start masquerading as solid knowledge. And because AI relies entirely on human-generated data, this unconscious mental preconditioning bleeds right into AI datasets. We are essentially teaching the machine our own blind spots. To combat this, we really need a mindset shift. Professor Barad argues we need to ditch that obsolete idea that every problem is just a two-sided coin. That super limited, binary thinking that just traps us into choosing between option A or option B. Instead, we need to look at problems as a multifaceted diamond, viewing issues across three-dimensional, four-dimensional, or even nine-dimensional perspectives. This demands that we step back, challenge our baseline assumptions, demand much more robust evidence, and really embrace a wider diversity of thought in how we solve problems.
Moving on to Section 2, the literary lens.
Now, you might be wondering, what on earth does literature have to do with coding? Well, modern critical theories are actually the absolute perfect tools to spot invisible biases hiding inside the machine. The crucial point here is understanding exactly how generative AI models learn in the first place. They're trained on massive, pre-existing datasets, basically gobbling up the entire internet. Because of this volume, the algorithm inherently privileges dominant cultures and mainstream voices simply by the sheer amount of text available to it. It relies really heavily on standard registers of the English language. So what does that mean in practice? It means marginalized voices, non-mainstream narratives, and regional languages naturally get filtered out. The AI just inherits the historical prejudices attached to those dominant cultural texts it consumes.
To see exactly how AI inherits these historical prejudices, let's look at a foundational 1979 feminist text by Gilbert and Gabar called The Mad Woman in the Attic. They critiqued how patriarchal literary traditions, heavily authored by man over the centuries, often force female representation into extreme binaries. The nuanced, complex reality of women's lives was just completely flattened out. So you get the angel, idealized, pure, and submissive. Or, on the flip side, you get the monster, mad, hysterical, or deviant. Because AI is trained on vast libraries of canonical texts that feature this exact binary, it tends to just reproduce these exact same stereotypes when it generates new content for us.
Let's jump into Section 3, testing gender and race.
This is where the explainer gets incredibly practical. To put these literary theories to the test, Professor Barad actually conducted live prompt experiments with his audience, directly querying AI to see what it spits back. Let's walk through some of those results. When asked to write a Victorian story about a scientist, the AI defaulted straight to a male protagonist named Dr. Edmund Bellum. The bias is super clear there. Intellectual or scientific roles immediately default to males based on the historical texts it ingested. But when asked to list dramatists of the Restoration era, it actually included the female writer Aphra Behn. This is fascinating because it shows the AI's dataset is progressively updating to include diverse voices that historically might have been ignored. Finally, for a Gothic female character, some audience members got the classic pale and trembling stereotype, while others actually got rebellious and brave characters. So the machine is clearly learning, but those traditional century-old biases, They are still lingering right below the surface.
And the real-world consequences of these biases? They're severe. Just take a moment to consider this number, 34%. This stat comes from landmark research by Timnit Gebru and Joy Buolamwini. They found that commercial facial recognition AI systems had error rates of less than 1% for white men, but up to a staggering 34% for dark-skinned women. The AI essentially sees whiteness as the default, replicating the exact kind of erasure often seen in historical literature, but this time it has incredibly real-world technological implications.
Let's test this further with a really simple prompt. Describe a beautiful woman. This reveals whether the AI leans on Eurocentric physical traits, giving responses like, skin with the softness of moonlight on marble, or if it progresses to valuing intellect, confidence, and inner spirit over body shaming or skin color. It's incredibly interesting to observe this shift in real time. The responses generated during the lecture showed a real mix, proving that while AI is slowly moving away from the physical biases of classical literature, remnants of those old aesthetic metaphors absolutely remain embedded deep in the code.
Which brings us to Section 4, the politics of algorithms.
We've seen the cultural biases, so now let's pivot into analyzing ideological biases by impartially comparing the data points of two major global AI models to see how national origins actually affect output. On one hand, we have ChatGPT from OpenAI, rooted in an American liberal spirit. It generally leans open, though it is sometimes critiqued by some observers for wokeism. Contrast this with DeepSeek, a Chinese model, which the source material describes as exercising deliberate algorithmic control to block specific political histories. Let's see exactly how these differing underlying philosophies hold up under testing.
When looking at a side-by-side comparison of a poetry prompt about world leaders, a really stark difference emerges. The audience asked both AIs to write a satirical poem in the style of W.H. Auden. For Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, both ChatGPT and DeepSeek generated the poems, referencing things like iron fists or building walls. But when prompted about Xi Jinping, DeepSeek flatly refused, outputting beyond my current scope. This perfectly illustrates how deliberate algorithmic control operates to block negative historical facts or critiques regarding specific governments.
When pushed further about Chinese history, the AI returned a response offering constructive answers regarding positive developments. Now, Professor Barad notes that literary criticism warns us to be deeply cautious of phrasing like constructive answers or positive developments in these contexts. Historically speaking, these seemingly polite goody-goody words are often used by authorities as tools to silence marginalized identities, hide complex realities, and basically pave over the nuanced truth.
And finally, Section 5, Becoming Data Uploaders.
So, we've seen the biases and we've seen the politics. But what's the actionable resolution for us here? How do we fix this biased technological mirror? The answer lies in how we handle cultural knowledge. Take the debate around the Pushpaka Vimana, a legendary flying chariot from the Indian epic the Ramayana. If an AI model dismisses this purely as myth, while simultaneously treating flying objects from Greek or Norse mythology as historical fact, well, that is a clear bias against Indian knowledge systems. However, if AI applies a uniform standard, treating all ancient flying objects globally as myths, then it's being consistent. We just need to ensure AI evaluates all global traditions fairly without specifically penalizing indigenous knowledge. To fix this, we actually need to look to a deeply human literary concept from the brilliant Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, the danger of a single story. She explains that cultures get stereotyped simply because there are too few stories told about them. If the AI is heavily biased, it's largely because there is a massive lack of diverse stories in its dataset. I mean, we really can't expect the machine to know stories it hasn't been told, right?
And this brings us directly to Professor Barad's ultimate call to action. First, stop being just data downloaders. Second, start being data uploaders. Third, publish diverse digital content. And hey, get in there and edit Wikipedia. Fourth, tell your own cultural stories to the machine. We have the tools. We cannot hide behind post-colonial arguments complaining about the global north if we are too lazy to upload our own diverse data and regional languages. We absolutely have to feed the machine the truth.
So, I'm going to leave you with this final provocative thought. The artificial intelligence we use tomorrow is entirely dependent on the data we provide it today. It's a mirror, and it's time we gave it something beautiful, diverse, and truthful to reflect. So, focused learners, what story will you upload to the machine? Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.